In December 2022, nearly 10 months after launch, Elden Ring put out a free update focused entirely around PvP. With that update, many PvP focused players got excited. You see, gentle viewer, the base game didn't really have any focus on PvP. There was a way to invade and a way to leave a dueling sign, but no covenants or other factions, no forced invasion zone, a lower per session player count, and no arena. Basically, the PvP diehards from Dark Souls 3 waited 6 years to trade down, and I was among them. I was personally devastated by the systems in place, or lack thereof, with my only long term gameplay now boiled down to 1v3 invasions or 2v2 tag teams, the latter of which is exceptionally difficult to facilitate as an invader. I, like many players, had big expectations for Elden Ring. The biggest FromSoft title to date set the expectation that they would expand on every previous system, especially multiplayer. After all, each game only made it more robust than the last. But obviously, I was wrong. Elden Ring shifted focus entirely from a dungeon crawler action RPG with secondary multiplayer to an open world action RPG with secondary dungeon crawling and tertiary multiplayer. Now, I think there's plenty of room for interpretation when defining what Elden Ring is focused on, but I don't think there's really any room to argue that it's multiplayer. As I discussed in a previous video, Elden Ring actively discourages cooperation and PvP. Participating in multiplayer removes some of the game's most significant additions, and for me, that is very representative of Elden Ring's issue. It is a new type of game with old systems grafted onto it, like some sort of terrible god baby playing as a lord. What do I mean by that? When Demon's Souls launched in 2009 on the PS3, the modern PlayStation Network was in its infancy. Add to that the fact that Demon's Souls was not exactly a well-promoted title, and you could be forgiven for not even realizing it had multiplayer. But it did, and it laid the groundwork for every future Souls title. Summoning phantoms, invading, and leaving messages are all there, working more or less the same as they do now at a fundamental level. So with Dark Souls being released on both the PS3 and the more popular Xbox 360, whose Xbox Live service had access to a wider user base, a reputation was built. We all know Dark Souls is, thanks to the mainstream media and nerd journalism, widely associated with difficulty and intense boss design, but a major part of its reputation is owed to its multiplayer. Silent cooperation and PvP developed their own etiquette. Guiding a host to hidden items, bowing before the violence of a duel, emphatically gesturing in praise of triumph and the sun, and rudely gesturing at a defeated foe. These are memorable trends forged by a community working within a unique framework. These trends were further developed and altered for future titles, each adding its own little piece of quality, but specifically, I want to call out Elden Ring for its addition. Nothing. And as much as I don't know how literally true that is, it feels true. And it is true. As far as I'm concerned, the only worthwhile additions Elden Ring has made to the multiplayer is the option to invade anywhere and the summoning pools, both of which are necessary counterweights to problems the game's open world introduced. Every other multiplayer function has been ported from previous titles while watering down their lore. It is a game that doesn't seek an identity in its multiplayer, and so it suffers. But when they made the decision to release a major update, one that got its own trailer and was touted as a free DLC, I got excited. I thought, after 10 months, with an average player count less than 5% its launch average, compared to Dark Souls 3's 12% average player retention in the same interval, according to the Steam database, that From Software were taking time to recognize their mistake. But I was wrong. Instead, what we got was the Colosseum, 3 different but equally bland arenas where PvP was the focus. Okay, you might say, so the arenas aren't very interesting from a level perspective. That doesn't matter, it's all about the gameplay. And setting aside how level design impacts gameplay and the fact that I cannot hear you, you're right. I could easily forgive the lackluster design as lore appropriate and of low consequence. In point of fact, that was my stance on release. For me, the headline of this update was obvious. 6-player multiplayer. When I read that, I reverted to a child on Christmas. I even briefly reverted to Catholicism. My prayers had been answered. But we didn't get 6-player multiplayer in the way I had hoped. Instead, we were only getting 6 players in the arena, not in the overworld. This is something that confused me immensely. To this day, I assume it was simply due to them not wanting to add an item or change the Taunter's Tongue to act like the dried finger in Dark Souls 2 and 3. It is also possible the devil was involved, but just to be safe, I have formally renounced Christian God and all his followers. I had spent my time before and after the game's release loudly screaming that they had killed my boy. I even sunk so low as to post on Reddit with this gem. For those in the audience who have not seen Black Sails, that is notorious pirate Ned Lowe severing a man's head for suggesting he was a bad captain. That post went over poorly. I got into arguments, used curse words, and probably made some lifelong enemies who wouldn't mind having my address. So if the moderators were sensible enough to delete the post following a heated comment section, why would I cop to making this? Because I was right. Elden Ring's PvP scene is lacking. You can find invasions, absolutely, but they just aren't the same. With no 3v3 or 4v2, it's stale. So where does the Colosseum come in? Previous titles have had arenas, each of which serving as a temporary intrigue to players before the roughness of their edges turned players away and toward more tried-and-true methods. The Battle of Stoicism, released in the Dark Souls Artorias of the Abyss DLC, was an interesting first try, with a 3-floor arena and its matchmaking brackets separated by level groups, 1 to 50, 51 to 100, 101 to 200, and 200 plus. The idea of level brackets, I think, was a little bit before its time and a little bit flawed. I love the idea of level brackets for PvP arenas. World of Warcraft's Battlegrounds are a classic example of how robust low-level play can be when properly accommodated. But in the case of Dark Souls, the odds a typical player would be entering the arena at all were slim, let alone at a low level. It's given minimal explanation, and the average PvP experience up to that point would be a mean red man you do not know showing up to stab you in the butt. So if we assume the average player isn't likely to enter the arena, what are the odds that players level 1 to 50 are defeating Knight Artorias and then entering the arena? While it's obviously far from impossible, it's not at all likely. So why did they include a low bracket? Well, it's a good idea. Low-level PvP is something I find extremely rewarding. I love doing a lot with a little, using restrictions to be more creative. Plus it gives equipment that may not shine at higher levels a chance to be optimal. Level brackets make sense in general. But this system was not retained in any future iteration of the arena. Instead, both Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring, the arenas utilize the standard matchmaking formula. What is the standard matchmaking formula, you might ask? Lower level limit, level times 0.9 minus 10, upper level limit, level times 1.1 plus 10. How would I know that, you ask? Understandably confused? You wouldn't. The game does not tell you. It takes independent verification and testing from the community to learn this information. On one end, I love this about the Souls series. Not knowing how or why you are being matched adds to the mystique and ethereal nature of their trademark multiplayer. On the other hand, this is a terrible way to implement a dedicated menu-based matchmaking system whose sole purpose is to facilitate PvP. What this means is if you want to find a match in the Colosseum, you need to be within these invisible level ranges of everyone else you match with and all searching at the same time. The fact that you can ever find a match is a miracle, hastily illusioned by an agreement of the community to settle on ruin level 150. Or was it 125? Or 200? Wait, what level should I be? Let's break it down. If you want a PvP in Elden Ring, you can invade, which matches at a more narrow lower level range and a wider upper level range, and like Iowa, only requires single party consent. It also, however, gives you limited to no control over your battlefield and places you at a significant disadvantage in the form of being lower level than your opponent, being outnumbered, and having half as many recovery resources. If you want to duel to keep the odds a little more even, you can place a red sign in an eligible location of your choice or send it to any summoning pools you have active. This, however, requires the host to manually agree to the duel and gives you no insight into how long you may be waiting or who they might bring to the party. So when we look for what the Colosseum might improve about this system, I would think the greatest benefit would be to reduce the friction of the aforementioned options. Faster matchmaking with better odds. And, to its credit, the Colosseum can provide this, but only if you are doing the same thing as everyone else at the same time. Remember, in order to use the arena, you cannot be participating in any other part of the game. You need to wait in a stationary location. With the Colosseum, you get a menu interface that can be accessed from the Round Table Hold or from the physical arenas in the overworld. That menu gives you options for the type of battle you want, whether or not you want Spirit Ashes enabled, the number of players you wish to participate with, the location of your battle, and most importantly, a password. What the menu does not give you is the ability to group with others or view the number of players actively matchmaking within your parameters. This is the most Dark Souls thing I can think of. not telling anyone how your system works or how to best use it, leaving them their own devices to figure it out. It works great when encouraging players to engage with problem solving against a difficult boss or confusing level, but it works terribly when asking people to align their actions in a narrow window. It's so obtuse that without extensive knowledge of the game's hidden mechanics, you would only find a match by sheer volume of other confused players when the game's player count is at its highest. But as we are demonstrating, the game has terrible longevity for multiplayer, so unless you're playing in the first month of new content, good luck getting a match before doing your research. And the harder it is to find a match, the less willing people are to engage with the system, making it even harder to find a match. It's a death spiral that From Software doesn't seem interested in avoiding. Just speaking this aloud has made my brain crawl further into the back of my skull to get away from my mouth. Back to what the menu does include, essentially all of these options are just directly copied from Dark Souls 3 with no adjustments, but the one I take specific exception to is the password. I love that you are able to facilitate password matches with friends. It's a great feature and works well enough. Where it falls incredibly short is not allowing you to have a password with some of the participants and not others. Meaning if you and a friend or two friends want to PvP as a team, something you can't really do in the overworld without ganking, you cannot use a password for just your people and match with randoms for the remainder. This effectively removes any way to group PvP without full group PvP. If you are 3 or 5 friends who want to play together, too bad. You can't group together and find a 4th or 6th who doesn't have your password, and the Colosseum does not have a game mode for 3 or 5 players. Now, while you can match with another team who is using a different password, I've never had any serious luck finding matches this way, and that makes sense. It relies on 2 groups having the same idea at the same time in the same range. This is frustrating to say the least. I understand that the idea of an organized team going against randoms isn't very fair, but I think this is both a case of the developers not thinking to expand the system, and a case where fairness should come second to the ability to find a match. After all, the least fair game mode is the one you don't get to play. So alright, the Colosseum doesn't let you play with friends against randoms. Maybe you'd be just as happy queuing for random matches anyway, but the Colosseum falls short here as well. When I gave the formula earlier, I excluded something important: weapon level matchmaking. This is a system introduced in Dark Souls 3 to combat extreme imbalances in PvP, and on the whole, I think it's a good idea with shoddy implementation. For those who do not know, the level of your highest ever upgraded weapon is a major factor in your matchmaking range. In Dark Souls 3, it went like this. A player with a maximum weapon upgrade level of +0 could only match with players who had a maximum weapon upgrade level of +0 or +1. An upgrade level of +1 could match with +0, +1, or +2. These ranges expanded at higher upgrades. At +6, you could match with +4 through +8, and at +7, you could match with +5 to +10. Now, Dark Souls 3 also had 2 other types of upgrades beyond the normal 0 to 10 in the form of Twinkling Titanite and Titanite scale weapons, both of which upgraded from 0 to 5. Simply enough, these weapons counted in the formula at a value of 2, so a +2 special weapon is equivalent to a +4 regular weapon, and a +5 is equivalent to a +10. But in Elden Ring, oh, you don't have the right. Regular weapons are leveled 0 to 25. Somber weapons are leveled 0 to 10. Already, that's a lot more math. The simplest way to break down regular weapons is in groups of 3-ish. A level 3 weapon can match with anything between level 0 and level 6, and a level 6 weapon can match with anything between level 3 and level 10. The ranges expand as you climb too, so that's about as simple as I can make it while remaining mostly unhelpful. For somber weapons, you treat them as having a value of 2.5 rounded down. So 0 is 0, 1 is 2, 2 is 5, 3 is 7, 4 is 10, etc. Within the confines of the Colosseum, a voluntary PvP zone, this should bring a singular question to mind. Why? Why is this system implemented at all even? The obvious answer would be to use the scaling system to adjust weapon levels to that of the maximum host weapon level, or a predetermined level. The level of weapons does affect their scaling, so it could mess with some builds' fine-tuning, but it would allow everyone to interact far more efficiently. If that doesn't sound appealing to you and you like the more restrictive setup, then you can get the hell out. But seriously, FromSoft allows passwords to overcome both the rune level and weapon level requirements and applies a downscaling formula based on bad alchemy. And overleveled phantoms are allowed to beat on lower level invaders to their heart's content. Seems only reasonable that some level of scaling might be suitable for the Colosseum. Ideally, scaling based on good alchemy. But wait, there's more. Beyond the difficulty of finding a match in the Colosseum, Elden Ring gives you another obstacle: the timer. Each match that allows respawns has a preset timer of 5 minutes. This cannot be adjusted in any way. That means if you want to fight for any more than 5 minutes, you need to either re-queue and hope to fake Christ you get the same caliber match, or take your business elsewhere. Now, I know this is exactly the sort of thing that if it were to have an option, it would only further complicate the formula. People who selected 5 minutes wouldn't be able to match with people who selected 10 or 15, and people who chose unlimited will still be fighting to this very day, no doubt happier than I. This is just another glaring flaw of this sort of matchmaking. The best thing about Dark Souls 3 gank squads was that they could go on forever. Now you're telling me I have 5 minutes to impose my values on someone with a 500 millisecond delay? Get real. And remember, this timer is for the match itself. There's no telling how long it might take you to find a match, so your total active playtime is going to tank. But Emo John, you ask, if it's so bad, how could they fix it? Well, my sweet baby child, let me tell you. They could add a timer adjuster or an option to remove timers. This is the sort of thing that would make the most sense if determined by game mode rather than a slider people had to agree on, but no matter what, 5 minutes is too long to have a bad match and not nearly enough for a good one. At least, not for me. They could make the more robust arenas with multiple floors and obstacles. This one is painfully obvious. Better arena design makes for more interesting gameplay, and no, I still can't hear you. I want to be a ranged build that can actually make use of elevation, and I want tight quarters so I can't be spell spammed from across the ring. They could incorporate a lobbying system to facilitate easier matchmaking. Give me the Halo 3 lobby menu. No adjustments. It needs to look exactly the same and needs to have voice chat from me during my freshman year of high school, a registered gamer of the Xbox Live Underground. They could create level brackets to tell people what to build for and to encourage players to make more diverse builds. This one feels obvious. You can access the first Colosseum in the starting area at any level. It only makes sense that its location would have some bearing on the caliber of opponents within. As it stands, the only way to get a match is to be at whatever the community has decided is the meta level, which only reinforces that PvP is something you do at the end of the game, when you've exhausted all other options and want to try something new for half an hour before the considerable learning curve and intense hostility forces you to set the game down and never come back. To drive all these points home, I want to explain something to you. The footage you've been watching has been me trying to get a match in the Colosseum at non-meta level. I have my settings on their least restrictive options, which would indicate to me that I should be at my most eligible for matchmaking. But as you can see, I have not found a match. What's more, I have written and recorded this voiceover before I recorded the footage. How did I know I wouldn't be able to find a match? Because the Colosseum doesn't work! There is no indication that other players are also seeking matchmaking. I can't tell what the eligible level ranges for my character even are without getting on the wiki to guess better, and it turns out that if you and your opponent do not have exactly the same settings selected, then you cannot be matched together. That's right, if you have any location selected and they select Limgrave, then the two of you have nothing in common and will not be fighting. Same goes for the number of players. 4 to 6 is not matched with 4 players or 6 players and will time out as soon as 4 is reached. Why is it even an option?